Hello guys, I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time. This is AfriPost and welcome to today's video.
The International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over the situation in Palestine, and we have previously called on the Office of the Prosecutor to urgently lead a thorough and impartial investigation into this matter, one that complies with international legal standards, to establish the facts and bring those responsible to justice. It is the collective duty of the international community to ensure that atrocities of this nature are duly prosecuted in terms of the Rome Statute and the Geneva Conventions. If all of this were happening in Africa, they would have already issued warrants. It took 3 weeks to issue warrants on Putin, 7 months, nothing on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his ministers. Of course, you'd have seen in reports today that the prosecutor of the ICC has received, like me, a letter from congressmen who have indicated that if you dare to issue a warrant, we will deal with you. Same letter I have received. Just imagine if South Africa were to ban the SABC. The whole media world would be on us. But what are they saying today about what Israel has done to Al Jazeera? Israel has made it a crime to express any empathy and support for Palestinians. And you also know that due to a range of very successful protests in the United Kingdom, the government there decided to add a new twist to the definition of terrorism, which meant essentially democratic, peaceful protests now become a terrorist act. Allow me to begin. Before I begin the lecture, I just want to make it clear, as I've tried to do in many settings, that South Africa's relationship with the Palestinian cause and the people of Palestine did not begin on the 8th of October. It's a long-established relationship because the people of Palestine were fully part of the international solidarity campaign against apartheid. Some of you who are young may not know that a strong element of the 5 key attributes that form the core of the liberation struggle, that one of those important elements was international solidarity. Our leaders, such as O.R. Tambo and many others, went all over the world educating about apartheid, educating about racism and discrimination, educating about colonialism of a special type, and saying to the world, you have a moral obligation to support us in our struggle for freedom. We wish you to become part of a global movement against apartheid. And that movement would become the International Anti-Apartheid Movement. And comrades and friends in Palestine that were spoken to at the time, even though they were suffering huge oppression themselves, they said, South Africa, we understand, we will join you in the struggle. Whatever way we can support you, we will. So it's a long-established relationship. It doesn't begin on 8th October, nor has it got anything to do with the elections, although I'll be voting ANC, but anyway. It doesn't have anything to do with the elections. It's a long-established relationship that we have, and we have it with many in the world. I've just been in Copenhagen in Denmark, and I had a round table with all the activists who were in the international anti-apartheid movement. I met an 82-year-old who had occupied the consulate of South Africa in Copenhagen in those days in the 1970s. And they stayed there and prevented consular services from being rendered by the apartheid state, and made all those officials extremely uncomfortable by occupying that building. And there are legions of such stories. I met artists against apartheid who painted all buildings associated with the apartheid state and marked them as racist for all the world to see. So it's vital that we as South Africans have a full appreciation, both of our imprint in terms of developing critical concepts for political activism, but also an appreciation of how the world stood with us. People ask me sometimes, how come South Africa is doing more than other Arab countries? And my answer is, I don't know. Because my experience is once the OAU decided to help us in our fight against apartheid, almost all African countries joined and acted in accordance with the decision of the Organization of African Unity. There were a few, irrelevant little ones who didn't quite follow, but the majority were part of the movement against apartheid. So with us, Africans were solid. And we hope that the Palestinian people will enjoy a similar solidarity. So now let me get to my lecture. Allow me to begin by recognizing the coordinator of this important program of the memorial lecture, Professor Salim Bali. He's a really radical person, a revolutionary. And I must say, I feel the fact that he invited me, maybe he thinks I've got a bit of revolutionary in myself too. Professor Bali. And then Professor Camilla Naidu, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities. And my great comrade and mentor, former Minister Ronnie Kasrils. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And yes, it's true, I was going to recognize our Director General, whose birthday it is today. Unfortunately, there's a very important meeting I was supposed to attend, and my only substitute can be the Director General. So I would have asked him to come and present this lecture, but I wanted to be here, so he had to go to that meeting for me. Then I wish to recognize Professor Samia Botme, the Dean of Economics of Bezate University, and all colleagues from Bezate University who join us today. I wish to recognize Advocate Diana Butu, our distinguished comrades from Gaza who are with us today, and all our comrades from Palestine who join us, and those from all over the international community who have taken an interest in this important subject. And of course, you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and I suppose my husband, Sharif. So nice to be with you for once. It's a real honor for me to address you today at this, the second Shireen Abu Akleh Memorial Lecture. To my mind, this lecture occurs against a troubling backdrop of evident decline in media freedom, with suggestions of complicity by practitioners that were previously ardent fighters for free media and expression. Just imagine if South Africa were to ban the SABC. The whole media world would be on us. But what are they saying today about what Israel has done to Al Jazeera? It is vital, I believe, that academics and academic institutions devote more time to this decline in freedom of expression and to the growing threat to it. The decline began well before the advent of embedded journalists, but it has lately snowballed and we need to be very worried about this development. In the past, journalists broadly knew they would enjoy robust and active protection from fearless colleagues and the public who would risk their lives to protect them. I believe the decline we are witnessing today cannot simply be explained away by citing the existence of wireless technology, social media, or other technologies. There's a bigger threat underway, and we need to pay more attention to it. This week, the world marks 2 years since the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh, the beloved veteran journalist who dedicated her life to the pursuit of justice and truth. To date, no one has been held accountable for her death, despite the initial global outrage, and there has been no reported progress in the investigation at the International Criminal Court, and silence with regards to any other investigations. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory concluded on reasonable grounds that Israeli forces used lethal force without justification under international human rights law when they shot and killed Shireen in the occupied West Bank, and thus violating her right to life. The situation for journalists in the occupied Palestinian territories has become increasingly grave over the past 7 months. They are marooned and abandoned by their colleagues, even as the world annually celebrates World Press Freedom Day. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, as of April 23rd this year, at least 97 journalists and media workers have been killed in Gaza since 7th October. The targeting of journalists in the occupied territories is part of a pattern of silencing the free press and is an outright contravention of international law. International human rights law obligates an occupying power to allow for freedom of expression and protests. The ability of journalists to cover events as they take place is essential, and efforts to intimidate and assassinate members of the media should not be allowed to continue with impunity. I wonder of us gathered here, how many know the names of the 97 who have been murdered? If Shireen were alive today, she would have been in the trenches in Gaza, reporting day and night on the atrocities taking place, in the hope that the world would take notice and show their solidarity with the Palestinian people. She would have been devastated by the wholesale destruction of civilian life in Gaza and the unfathomable global intolerance of the unending suffering of the Palestinian people, many of whom have died agonizing deaths trapped under the rubble. She would have been reporting on the immense suffering of survivors in Gaza who are now battling unprecedented hunger and starvation, as well as continuous military assaults by the occupying forces. Regrettably, despite the ruling by the highest court of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, the Israeli state has continued its murderous assault on the people of Gaza with impunity, killing more civilians, maiming thousands of others, continuing the bombing of homes and other buildings and infrastructure, affecting every possible avenue of life of the residents of Gaza. This includes hospitals, ambulances, hundreds of schools, all universities in Gaza, cultural and religious institutions, and much more. The vast majority of the dead and injured are women and children. According to the report by the UN Human Rights Office on 18 April this year, United Nations experts have expressed grave concern over the pattern of attacks on schools, on universities, teachers, and students in the Gaza Strip, raising serious alarm over the systemic destruction of the Palestinian education system. The report states that with more than 80% of schools in Gaza damaged or destroyed, it may be reasonable to ask if there's an intentional effort to comprehensively destroy the Palestinian education system, an action known as scholasticide. The term refers to the systemic obliteration of education through the arrest, detention, or killing of teachers, students, and staff, and the destruction of educational infrastructure, as earlier speakers indicated today. After 6 months of military assault, more than 5,479 students, 261 teachers, 95 university professors have been killed in Gaza, and over 7,819 students and 756 teachers have been injured, with numbers growing every day. At least 60% of educational facilities, including 13 public libraries, have been damaged or destroyed, and at least 625,000 primary and secondary school students and over 100,000 college and university students in Gaza have no access to education. The IDF has damaged or destroyed 9 out of every 10 schools, at least 65 of which were UNRWA-run facilities, sheltering thousands of displaced civilians. Between October 2023 and January this year, the IDF bombed all the universities in Gaza. Consequently, Gaza's treasured intellectual landmarks, including the Islamic University of Gaza, the North Gaza and Tubas branches of Al-Quds University, and Palestine Technical University have all been destroyed. Another 195 heritage sites, 227 mosques, and 3 churches have also been damaged or destroyed, including the Central Archives of Gaza, containing 150 years of history, all gone. Isra University, the last remaining university, was demolished by the military of Israel on January 17 this year. This obliteration of schools, universities, and libraries furthers the settler colonial project of Eurasia, because these are spaces that nurtured the creation and transmission of knowledge. The destruction of schools, universities, libraries, and research facilities has deprived Palestinians of the histories and knowledge housed in these institutions. Attacks on education are often a key indicator of state intolerance of views that do not reflect state thinking. This should not be tolerated by all of us. The international academic community should have sent a clear message that those who target schools and universities in other states will be held responsible, and that accountability for these violations will include an end to collaboration, an end to donations, an end to financial support. Universities are the bedrock of knowledge and truth, and they require freedom to do their essential work of knowledge generation and innovation. World universities must keep a watching brief on the reconstruction of Palestine and insist that the program includes the reconstruction of all education facilities at all levels. And of course, you know that wherever I speak on this question, my expectation is after our talk, you will become activists. I do not talk to passive audiences. Today, as educators, advocates, activists, civil society, and state structures, we should all play a role in the global struggle in search of truth and justice. It is our collective responsibility to raise our voices in solidarity with the people of Palestine, who are fighting for their survival in the midst of the genocidal campaign being waged against them. You may think it doesn't affect you, but one day someone will turn against your universities, and that day you will wish you had stood up and acted. Don't let that happen. University students in other regions of the world need to feel the support of universities worldwide in a unified rejection of injustice, harm, and murder. Our own institutions of higher learning have a special responsibility, due to the history I referred to earlier, to lead by example and to provide moral and political leadership, given that they claim to play a key role in advancing critical citizenship. How can it be when you say you advance critical citizenship that you are in institutions that are complicit and silent? How is that possible? This has been done by our institutions in the battle against apartheid, and you have to do it again. I remember, days are very nice of protest now. I remember being a lecturer at the University of Cape Town, and they brought Caspers onto our campus. And our students, mainly students of SASCO, I must say, they lay down in front of the Caspers, and those Caspers could not move. They didn't allow them because they said, we are lying down, and if you're going to proceed, you go over our bodies, and you will kill us. They stopped right next to the students. I remember I was right there. But the students were not afraid. They didn't stand up. They stood their ground. They lay there. They stood for humanity. This is all we're asking you to do. In November last year, more than 1,000 individuals connected to higher education in South Africa, including researchers, lecturers, administrators, and students at public universities and other institutions, signed an open letter on solidarity with Palestine. They condemned Israel's onslaught on the people of Gaza and the targeting of schools, universities, hospitals, and emergency support infrastructure. And they called on University South Africa and the Academy of Science of South Africa and their members to do the same. The University of Cape Town and the University of the Western Cape have made official statements calling for a ceasefire and immediate humanitarian aid to Gaza. The UCT Senate has resolved that no UCT academic should collaborate with any academic on any research project if they are identified with the Israeli Defense Force. The majority in the Senate voted in favor of supporting Palestinian academics and the right to have free debates on Zionism without being accused of anti-Semitism. Stellenbosch University Senate members have called for an end to the brutal and barbaric destruction of Gaza, saying that no crimes can justify genocidal actions in retaliation. Unfortunately, the Senate did not pass a resolution on the Israel-Palestine crisis, on the genocide and destruction of scholarship and education in Gaza, as the majority of Senate members did not agree with this resolution. One of the strongest statements has come from the University of Fort Hare, where I will be speaking tomorrow. The university from where many of our struggle stalwarts emanated. The University of Fort Hare has called for an immediate ceasefire that must be enforced by the United Nations, and the smooth passage of humanitarian aid into Gaza, equitably distributed throughout the whole territory of the Gaza Strip. The university has expressed its support for our government's call for the International Criminal Court to investigate international war crimes committed by Israel. Of course, you'd have seen in reports today that the prosecutor of the ICC has received, like me, a letter from congressmen who have indicated that if you dare to issue a warrant, we will deal with you. Same letter I have received. Fort Hare has also committed not to pursue any institutional links with Israeli institutions, as these have played a key role in supporting settler colonial oppression and apartheid, and have been complicit in grave violations of human rights, including developing weaponry, military doctrines, and legal justification for the indiscriminate mass targeting of Palestinians. The University of Fort Hare has committed itself to helping end the 17-year siege on Gaza and called for the immediate release of Palestinian academic staff and students who are being held in terms of Israeli apartheid legislation and in violation of international law. We applaud Fort Hare for the strong stand it has taken, and our other universities that continue to express solidarity with Palestinian universities, scholars, and students. But we need Fort Hare to be joined by more powerful forces. And can you imagine if this institution, one of the largest in our country, one of the most significant, one of the wealthiest, one of the most academically productive, can you imagine if it joined Fort Hare, what the impact of such a unity in activism would be? Recently, the renowned Palestinian feminist scholar, Nadira Shaub-Kevokian, was suspended from the Hebrew University for her outspoken stance against genocide. Professor Shaub-Kevokian had previously been unjustly suspended by Hebrew University following a month-long smear campaign by the university because she urged for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and described Israel's military assault against Palestinians in Gaza as genocide. While she's now been reinstated, Israel has made it a crime to express any empathy and support for Palestinians. And you also know that due to a range of very successful protests in the United Kingdom, the government there decided to add a new twist to the definition of terrorism, which meant essentially democratic, peaceful protests now become a terrorist act. So, We now have a situation where being anti the notion of genocide is acceptable public opinion in Israel. And that is what you must express. You must deny the truth, because by denying the truth, you are doing what the Israeli government wants you to do. The mobilization in support of Professor Shalhoub Kebokian on our South African campuses is really commendable, and we thank South African universities for their support to her. We are also encouraged by the growing mobilization on college campuses across the world in support of the just cause for freedom and justice of the people of Palestine. Columbia University has been the locus of protest against America's support for the war in Gaza. Columbia University has a long history of protest on social justice issues in past decades, from the war in Vietnam to protests in support of the civil rights movement and the university campus movement against apartheid in South Africa in the 1980s. Columbia was the first American university to divest from apartheid South Africa. The student encampment at Columbia University, which began on April 17th, has inspired students worldwide. Students had camped out in tents in protest over the war in Gaza and called for the university to divest itself from anything related to Israel. A massive crowd of faculty recently walked out in solidarity with students and with the movement for Palestine at Columbia University. Princeton University faculty and staff have also affirmed their solidarity with and support for the Columbia University and Barnard College students who are continuing their demand that the university divest from Israel's genocide in Gaza and ongoing occupation of the West Bank, of East Jerusalem, and other Palestinian land. Princeton has also called on Columbia University to reverse the suspension of the student groups in the university, the Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine and Columbia Jewish Voices for Peace. Yale University, where my grandfather graduated, has become another flashpoint in the conflict between pro-Palestinian demonstrators and university administrators. Demonstrators were camped at the University Plaza, protesting Yale's refusal to divest from military weapons manufacturers, as they claim, the students, that it makes Yale complicit in Israel's genocide in Gaza. Students at the University of Minnesota were also recently arrested for demanding that their school divest funds from arms companies, including General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, and Honeywell. Students at New York University and MIT are the latest to have joined the pro-Palestinian movement. We are hopeful that this unprecedented activism by students in the United States will also spur greater activism among student movements here in South Africa and throughout the African continent. And if we start in South Africa, everyone will follow. We hope that this would then spur more vocal support from our university administrators, some of whom have remained silent. It is, dear colleagues, utterly unacceptable that Israel continues to disregard the rulings by the International Court of Justice, as well as UN resolutions, and continues its unrelenting bombardment of Gaza with impunity. Israel has simply ignored the ICJ's ruling, which granted South Africa's urgent request of 6 March 2024 for further provisional measures to prevent Israel from causing irreparable harm to the rights invoked by South Africa under the 1948 Genocide Convention in respect of the ongoing siege in Gaza. The court was unambiguous when it agreed with South Africa's assertion that the situation in Gaza had deteriorated significantly since the court's order of 26 January this year, as a result of Israel's failure and their failure in responsibility to comply with the court's rulings. The lack of accountability by Israel is increasingly clear. Those of you who are old enough to remember apartheid will recall that towards the end, as it was about to crumble, it became fierce in oppression. The seeds of the fall are here, and it needs us to be active in supporting it to ensure that those seeds flower. So don't rest. We concur as South Africa with the assertion of the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health, Ms. Tlaleng Mofokeng, when she very correctly stated that Israel's war in Gaza has from the start been a war on the right to health and has obliterated the Palestinian territory's health system. We further agree with the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories, Ms. Francesca Albanese, when she recently highlighted that the continuation of Israel's impunity and exceptionalism is no longer viable, especially in light of the binding UN Security Council Resolution 2728, which called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. In this respect, we call on the international community to act to bring the perpetrators to justice and ensure accountability for the victims and their families. Unfortunately, due to my experiences of the letters and other actions, I can't tell you how to act because that is often used against me. But I can tell you to be activists. I won't tell you what to do, but be activists. The evidence that we have of the mass killings of civilians points to the perpetration of war crimes, crimes against humanity, which include murder and extermination, and genocide, as defined in Articles 6, 7, and 8 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, as well as violations of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, specifically the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in a time of war, as well as customary international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law prohibits attacks on civilians and non-combatants, underlying the need to protect human life during times of war. I hope in this university, your lecturers encourage you to refer to international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and not to use phrases that are coined by unilateral actors of global rules-based system. The rules are international human rights law, international humanitarian law. There are no other rules. It's not football here. We're a world community, and we have conventions and protocols that we ratify in our parliaments, and it is those that set the rules. There's no other global rule-based world order. It's not. Conventions and protocols signed by us. Laws we frame. So don't be bamboozled, because when someone is saying rules-based, they mean do what I want. They don't mean the laws we've all signed on to. So don't be fooled. And if your lecturers use that rules-based thing, just challenge them. It is clear from international law that states have to ensure that non-combatants are protected, even in times of war. As South Africa, we were really appalled and disgusted by the recent grim discovery of a mass grave containing the remains of over 200 Palestinian civilians at Nasser Hospital in Gaza. This followed the reported discovery of mass graves at Al-Shifa Hospital. These grim findings necessitate immediate and comprehensive investigations to ensure justice and accountability. The International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over the situation in Palestine, and we have previously called on the Office of the Prosecutor to urgently lead a thorough and impartial investigation into this matter, one that complies with international legal standards, to establish the facts and bring those responsible to justice. It is the collective duty of the international community to ensure that atrocities of this nature are duly prosecuted in terms of the Rome Statute and the Geneva Conventions. If all of this were happening in Africa, they would have already issued warrants. It took 3 weeks to issue warrants on Putin, 7 months, nothing on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his ministers. We are equally concerned as South Africa with Israel's use of starvation as a weapon of war. Israeli human rights group B'Tselem has recently issued a new report, Manufacturing Famine, which concludes that Israel has been committing the crime of starvation under international law in the Gaza Strip. According to the report, the severe hunger that has developed over recent months in the Gaza Strip is the product of a deliberate and conscious Israeli policy. It has been openly declared by decision makers, including a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, from the very beginning of the war, not in the middle, not later, right at the start. For months, Israel has pursued a policy of total blockade, complete destruction of the possibility of local food production through farming or fishing, and restrictions on the delivery of aid. The result of this policy is millions of starving people. Now imagine the NSFAS recipients. If you were denied access to your allowance, totally denied, no food whatsoever. This is what's happening to the people of Palestine, and we are silent. We should all be going on hunger strike until they have food, even if it's once a week, something to show our solidarity. During Israel's blockade, Israel's years of blockade on Gaza, it has studied how much food Gaza's residents need to survive. Israel has drafted mathematical formulae and put together caloric tables for this purpose. As B'Tselem points out in its report, this means Israel entered the war with a vast amount of knowledge about the needs of Gaza's population and made a conscious choice to deny them, pushing hundreds of thousands of people into hunger and using starvation as a method of warfare. This is full dehumanization and nothing else. The dehumanization of Palestinians in Israeli eyes has accelerated in recent months. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, in March this year, 2.2 million people, almost 100% of the population in Gaza, were experiencing phase 3 level food insecurity or worse. 1.17 million were at phase 4, and nearly 500,000 people were experiencing the highest level of food insecurity, phase 5. In early April, Samantha Power, who heads the United States Agency for International Development, assessed that famine was already occurring in northern Gaza. The assessment was given during a hearing of the US House Foreign Affairs Committee. This was the first time a US official declared that famine was already present in Gaza after months of warnings that the hunger crisis was escalating. For many months, Israel has prevented the required scope of humanitarian relief, including food and medicines, from entering the Gaza Strip, and particularly northern Gaza. The destruction that Israel sowed during the fighting has obliterated the ability to grow food, as I said earlier, and caused an almost entire reliance on outside aid, which aid is controlled by Israel. Israel is failing to meet its obligations in this regard by not allowing sufficient aid to enter the Strip, and by failing to guarantee the safe arrival of the aid to its destination, even in areas it says are under its control. A concrete criminal prohibition on starvation is set out in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Starvation of civilians is defined as a war crime under the ICC's jurisdiction, and they have to investigate and prosecute. Imagine 1 million signatures to the ICC saying we are waiting for you to prosecute. The Rome Statute definition of starvation is intentionally using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare by depriving them of objects indispensable to their survival, including willfully impeding relief supplies. So, in conclusion, in memory of Shireen Abu Akleh, we all continue to call on the ICC to prosecute these war crimes and to issue arrest warrants for those leaders in Israel who have ordered and presided over these crimes. The slowness to investigate and prosecute those responsible for these war crimes necessitates greater mobilization among the youth and civil society around the globe to ensure that justice for Palestinians is realized. As I have said, it is time for collective action by you and for us to champion the call for implementation of UN resolutions and rulings of the world's highest court. Your voice on this in social media, in protest, in petitions, would be immeasurably important. We owe this responsiveness to the people of Palestine and to the memory of our dear departed Shireen Abu Akleh. I thank you for having allowed me this opportunity.
I don't want to impose my opinion on the video. Let's really watch it and have a better discussion down in the comment section. If you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.